the first things that got me into music, of course, coming from a large family, and my father was a doctor, my mother was a school teacher, and a lot of music around the house, a lot of listening coming from Chicago, listening to jazz, blues, R&B, Miles Davis, John Coltrane, the Beatles, and then of course my older brother Maurice, already being in the business as a drummer for Chess Records, was a big help. So we were, right in the heart of listening to music. So that was the first time I got the bug.
And when he first started drumming for Chess Records, did you look up to him, and did you think, one day I also want to be?
Well, I was in awe. Well, I didn't know that I would have the opportunity, but the way it worked at Chess Records, they would record the records on Mondays, and they would be out on Fridays, and I would get we would get the advance copies, like on Thursday. They would call them the demo records, yeah.
So that must have been really exciting, and so you were listening to all these great jazz records and also the Beatles.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me
And Motown.
So tell me a bit about the Beatles and how they influenced you. Do you regard Paul McCartney as?
Well, we saw them on Ed Sullivan. The Ed Sullivan Show.
1964.
Yeah, when they came to America, that was the very, very first time. They came as this phenomenon. And then later on, we got into the musicianship later. We were a little young. But then we got into the fact, George Harrison, he plays great guitar. Oh, wow. Paul McCartney plays great bass. Lennon, Ringo. And then we had Motown. Then we had James Jamerson on bass, So I think those two elements really put music out there, in front of the national audience.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And what drew you to bass specifically?
When I came into my orchestra room and I saw it, I immediately fell in love with it. And then Maurice got me an upright bass from one of his buddies, and I started taking lessons, and then his buddy, the late Louis Satterfield, who was also in the Phoenix Horns and a bass guitar player and also the bass player on all those Chess records, was my teacher. So I'd go to his house. So during the week I would do like the classical thing, and then on the weekends I would do bass guitar.
Well, I mean, obviously, it shows that kind of. So, how old were you when you were, getting that kind of amazing education?
13,
wow,
14, teenager.
And aside from all of that during the week, would you say that you got? Because I've been asking some of the other greatest musicians I'm interviewing, about like how they first started practicing, how they first started getting into their instruments. Did you find yourself like the better you got, the more you were playing, and then
I would practice like 10, 12 hours a day.
Wow.
You know what I mean? Just listening and listening. When I'm off, I still practice an hour a day now. When I'm off, because just to hear the sound and kind of go back to the basics. Without lights, without stage.
That's awesome.
It's just you and a bass, and you're in a room.
Yeah.
By yourself.
But that's what made you fall in love with music.
Right.
Playing it. So it's
right.
Never gonna get old.
There's no bells. There's no stage. It's just you and the instrument. And that's how I learned.
And so when you started, did you learn by listening along to records? Obviously, you had all this education as well. So did you learn to read early, or were you doing a lot of stuff by ear, or a bit of both?
I learned how to read early. How to read early, and then listening, and then creating my own charts. Chord changes, different things. I kind of had my own technique, and it gave me an opportunity to sort of like be, create my own style. I wasn't really locked in. I had a chance to kind of, by doing the classical thing, I had that, and by being with, Satterfield and those guys, I had a chance to learn music and learning how to play in the studio at a young age.
Yeah, so it's both sides.
Right.
And then, so when did you think, or was there a turning point where you thought, okay, not only is this something that I love doing, but I actually want to do this professionally. I want this to be, my life's work.
Well, I knew I wanted to be a musician. I knew I wanted to do it. But the turning point came for me was when Maurice brought me here to California, and I was still in school. I was on scholarship. I was, it was paid for. It was Conservatory of Music, which was a big deal, at the time. And
so did you leave that to come here?
Yeah.
Wow. And
Yeah.
how old were you then?
18.
18.
So
Wow.
it happened from the time I was like 13, 14, 18. Things happened very fast.
Yeah,
Really
that's
you know.
young, you know, to be.
Yeah.
And you know, did you feel any, you know, pressure from your parents, or did you feel, you know, about giving that up to do this? Did you feel like it was a
No,
big risk?
they were very supportive.
Very supportive.
Because I was going with him. And
Yeah.
he had already been a
And he'd
professional.
already been, you know, doing.
He had already played with Ramsey Lewis. He had already been on stage. He had this idea about putting this band together and asked me that I want to come to California. Although in retrospect, I wasn't really ready, you know. And that was before we were Earth, Wind, and Fire, before we became successful. So that was like 5-6 years, you know, before the world found out. You know what I mean? So I had, you know, it was a work in progress. You know?
So what were those years like? Do you remember having, like, you know, quite a fire in your belly, and, you know, like, you know, we're going to make this work, and
it was just a
progress,
progress.
or did it feel really natural and easy?
It was great, you know. It was. You know how you mentioned earlier, you came out in LA, you really loved it.
Yeah.
You know, that's how I felt.
So yeah, you just fell in love with the city.
Yeah, but at 18 years old.
Yeah, which
So
is
it's different, you know what I mean?
spectacular,
It's
yeah.
really like different, you know. 18 years old was like, you know, being on the moon. And
Yeah,
it
yeah.
was very, artistic. A lot of artists were here, and everybody was here as they are now again, you know.
And those early Earth, Wind and Fire records, you know, do you look back at that time with great affection? You know, when did you first get a sign that the band was, you know, really destined to be something special?
Well, yeah, we did a couple of records for another couple of labels, Warner Brothers, but it was really when we signed to Clive Davis that we knew we were on our way, that we were gonna be successful. But we had a few records before that, you know. So by the time we got to Clive, we were ready, you know. Then that's really when the real journey began, you know, traveling around the whole country, opening up for other people. You know, we were opening act as well.
Who did you open for?
Uriah Heep back in the day, Rod Stewart, Curtis Mayfield, Gladys Knight, Barkays. We were opening for everybody.
A lot of people.
Rod Stewart, all those guys. So, but it was great. We had a great time because we had a chance to watch their shows. You know, we had a chance to just be around and play in front of those kind of audiences.
Yeah, well, I mean, you probably developed into an act, I'd say, that surpassed all of those guys. So, you know.
Well, we definitely were able to hold our own, but it was really exciting because we were doing something nobody else had ever done, you know, at that particular time, you know, coming out here. But for me, it was great coming out because it was different, you know. It was different than growing up in Chicago. Although Chicago was great too. It's a great foundation. It was great. But then when I came here, then it's, you know,
When things really
it was
started
like, you know,
happening.
it was like going to the moon, you know.
Yeah.
You know, although it was happening every year. Every year got better and better. Rehearsing, recording. Like to this day, I still love to record and still love to rehearse.
And how full on was the schedule during that time? Were you working all the time, like rehearsing, recording, touring?
Yeah, we were. We
Was it very
were.
full on?
Yeah, but we were doing it, making it up as we went along. You know.
Yeah.
You know, lifting equipment. You know, driving station wagons. Although they wouldn't let me drive except once. You know, a band, like a garage
proper
band.
band,
Like
yeah.
a band, but like a garage band. You know, you do it yourself. You know, you make your own sets. You make your own wardrobe. You know, you share 10 guys in one dressing room. You know, it's yeah. You know, you're sort of making it up as you go along.
And like, how many shows a year would you say you were having to do during those early days?
As many as you could.
As many as you could.
As many as you could find.
And how did they get booked up for you? Was it just as a result of the interest in your records?
I don't know. You know, I was so young. All I just knew there was a gig and I'd
There's a
go
gig,
to the gig.
you play it.
Let's go.
Yeah.
I wasn't, you know, I was not that sophisticated. You know what I mean? It wasn't like, you know,
Well.
I didn't know what an itinerary was. I didn't
Yeah.
know any of those things. You know, I didn't know what that meant. You know what I mean? I just knew I had a bass.
And
And
you
we
were
would
gonna
go
play
play
it
and
well.
plug in. Let's go play some shows.
That's awesome.
Now they weren't even called shows. They were just gigs.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know, it wasn't like, you know, concerts. You know, like now they're concerts.
Yeah, it was
know.
more music focused, less of the.
Yeah, well, you know, when you're that young, you know, I got a gig. You
Yeah,
know,
yeah.
So it was different. Yeah.
And so, how would you describe, like, you know, the signature Earth, Wind and Fire sound? And, you know, would you say that you found it during the mid '70s for the first time?
Yeah, I think, you know, even the records in the beginning that weren't successful, Maurice always had a very strong concept. You know, if you go back and listen to records the very, very first records, they had a definite concept to them. You know, it still had a foundation, you know, of an Earth, Wind and Fire sound, and it just kept growing and growing. So Maurice had a vision of what he wanted to hear, and he and we helped him with that vision of putting it together, because you have to understand there was no band prior to that doing that kind of music and that kind of musicianship and songwriting, and all in one group, all in one group.
And bass and drums are so important on Earth, Wind and Fire records. Is that a conscious thing that you know?
Well, of course, Maurice being a drummer, and my brother Fred being a drummer,
Yeah.
and you know, we grew up like that, so it was like probably just a natural thing.
And
all those tracks that Maurice and I played on together.
did those songs, you know, did you develop them all together? Like, you know, would you lay down bass and drums, or work that out before anything else?
Well, we would
Was
just
it all
cut the
together,
tracks. We would cut the tracks and go
live
back and
in the
listen
studio?
and things like that, and then we had the late Charles Stepney, who was fabulous for us, and who had worked with Maurice at Chess Records, and I would have to say that Charles was our George Martin, because he was more experienced, he was older, he would talk to us about music, he was very supportive, you know, he helped us get better, you know. So for us, you know, I think for any young person to have those two types of leaders and mentors was the best thing, because you learned it on the job, but you learned it in a good, loving way. I mean, you still had to work hard, you had to put the hours in, but it was still great to do, you know.
Yeah.
At least for me, you know.
And when you look back at you know, Earth, Wind and Fire's legacy discography, what would you highlight as being, you know, some of your favourite tunes? Not necessarily the sort of, you know, Septembers of this world that are obviously, you know, masterpieces and standards, but like what beyond those, beyond Let's Groove and Boogie Wonderland and.
Well, then Boogie, I said Boogie. The different ones. I love the Imagination. I love there was some Imagination on the Spirit album. I love Fantasy.
Yeah.
And ironically, Philip on both of those songs really great, fabulous, Philip Bailey.
Yeah.
There's a lot. On Your Face. Some of the instrumentals running, because you know we had instrumentals on the records too. You know. But what's interesting now, everywhere you go, there's always one of our songs on the radio somewhere. I think there's every minute and 15 seconds across the world they're playing an Earth, Wind and Fire song. And September probably, and there's undoubtedly, I think it's probably the 5th most popular song in the history of music. You know, it's ironically out of all the songs we did, that's one of the ones, and it's one of the most popular songs in the world. And if they don't even know us, they know the song.
And do you ever get, you know, so like if I'd imagine if I was like interviewing like Van Morrison and I talked about Brown Eyed Girl, he'd probably be a bit like, I'm not into that anymore. But with September, do you get bored of hearing it? Or
No.
Because it is just, I'd say it's the song that if you put it on at any party, any event, you know, people will just like go mad for it, no matter what their taste in music is.
It doesn't matter how old they are. It doesn't matter anything. Generations. It's everybody knows that song. They know the middle of the song. They know. It's just one of those songs that I think every band that's been successful has a song. That they're known by everybody. You know, and we were lucky that that was the song.
And what do you think in terms of, you know, full albums? What would you highlight as being, you know, some of the records that you're most proud of, like, as a whole?
I love the album, the All in All record. That was a great record for us because it was different. The I Am album, I love that album. Musically, performance-wise, sonically. And let me see. Head to the Sky was raw, different, you know. Each record got better and better and better. And what I love, I think we had 7 double platinums back to back in a row, which was kind of cool. Mm-hmm. And don't forget now, it was musical, you know, it wasn't, you know, just commercial.
No, not at
It was
all.
the arrangements, you know what I mean, that were put together, and Maurice's production, it's still some of the best productions on record. You can put those records on now; they sound just as good today as they did when they were recorded.
100%.
George Massenberg and Maurice's work, and our musicianship. You know what I mean? So those are some of the records. Probably more. They'll come to me after you leave.
Yeah.
But
Well, there's just
but
too
off
many.
the top of my
Too many.
off the top. There's too many off the top of my head.
Too many great records.
Right.
But and
Like this room, a lot of records.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there's certainly a trophy cabinet here.
Mm-hmm.
And so it would be great to talk a little bit about Maurice and his legacy and what he means to you, and it's what you guys achieved together is phenomenal, and you can listen back to it
Absolutely.
and be reminded of all those great times, but it would be just great to hear a bit about
Well,
your
first of all,
thoughts.
he was the coolest, and Mark Maurice, and he was we used to sit in my den in here when Maurice would come over, and just really brilliantly talented, cool of the cool of the cool, knew what he wanted, very focused, funny if you knew him. But I was the only one that could really, really make him laugh. But he was great, I wouldn't be sitting here if it hadn't been for him. He developed me and molded me, and I'll be grateful forever and ever and ever. And what we built together, still lives on. We built
it always will.
Yeah, always will. We built one of the biggest monstrosities, and that's still alive. I think it's probably us, Motown, the Biggies. You know what I mean? We're like a entity. We're a band, but it's an entity.
Yeah, it's something that's gonna live on.
It's like
one of the greatest acts of all time.
Yeah, it's like Apple. Apple. Earth and Fire. And, the Beatles. It's kind of got like Amazon.
And yeah, well, I agree.
You know it by name. You know by name.
And when when he first kind of called you up and asked you to come to LA as an 18-year-old, could you ever have imagined that it would be like this, or did you think is that what you were aiming for?
Not like this. I knew we were going to be successful. Back then I said, okay, I'll come out to California, and after 5 years, it would be over. Then I'll go back to Chicago. I'll get a teaching job, and maybe I'll play on weekends, and I'll teach. That was my dream.
So you were pretty down to earth then.
Yeah. So I was going to do that. I thought, but it just kept.
But it kept on going.
Then it went from 5 to 10 years, to 15, to 20, to 25, to 30. Now we're getting ready to have now it's almost close to 50.
Wow.
So yeah. So.
And you've got some shows coming up in Vegas at the Venetian.
Yeah, we're going to do another residency, which we're really looking forward to in March. I think it's the 20th through the 30th, or one of those days. I'll just pull it up online. And we did it. Our first one was in May last year, and that was really, really exciting. So, and we were saying, well, we hope they invite us back because it went so well, and when they did,
impressed they have.
Yeah, so it's a great room, by the way. It's the Phantom of the Opera room.
Yeah.
And it's a beautiful show, just beautiful.
Yeah. Oh, I think it's going to be spectacular because I know that you guys have played some UK shows recently, like Glastonbury went down.
Glastonbury, we did the Love Supreme show last summer, and then we did Bonnaroo, Firefly, and so these are the festivals of the new generation.
And do you still get a big kick out of performing, like you ever did?
Right, yeah, I do. But what happened was the reason I found out about Bonnaroo and Firefly because I have young kids. There are young kids work at my gym, like in their 20s, and they said, "Oh, Mr. White, you guys are going to play Firefly," and I'm saying, "Oh, great, cool." And I have to look like, "What's that?" I said, "Cool," you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so the fact of it is that now we have 5 generations of young people that come to see us, and they know all the songs, and they're really being discovered by us now, this generation, through their parents or their brothers or their sisters. that's what I find it's happening now. So when I take pictures now, they want me to take pictures with them for their parents,
Yeah.
for their dads and their moms and things like that. So I've watched the evolution of now what fans are coming to work
Passing
with
it down,
They want to work with us and want to hang out with us and want to take pictures with us. So and they're finding out through their parents and their brothers or sisters, or albums that have been laying around at the house that they didn't really, had never heard before.
Yeah, and then they put it on. They're probably getting their minds blown.
Right.
Yeah. Well, Verdine, it's been a real pleasure, and
Thank you very much.
And it's the greatest musicians of all time. Certainly, it's a well-deserved honour for you, and looking forward to writing this.
Well, thanks for coming over. Thank you so much.